One of the major problems that most students struggle with is the translation part of spoken English. Someone asks you a question, you listen, you take a moment to translate to your native language, you understand, you compose an answer in your native language, and then translate this word by word to English and give the person your answer. This is how most language learners start out. So before we get into the video, I want to make it very clear there is nothing wrong with this. There is nothing wrong with needing to translate when you communicate. The problem is, though, it takes a long time, it makes you feel less fluent and less confident if between each sentence you're having to translate and not able to answer fluently, quickly. Luckily, there are ways, there are techniques that you can teach yourself to start thinking in your target language. In this case, of course, our target language is English, and you are in the right place because today I am going to share some helpful methods and tips with you to get you thinking more regularly in English and giving more confident answers and needing less time to contribute to a conversation. Hi, my name is Catherine. I'm a business English teacher. I work with intermediate to advanced level students. So if that is where you are at in your English language learning journey, definitely subscribe. You will find lots of helpful videos on my channel related to business English, understanding grammar rules, English for the workplace, and overall how to increase your level, how to become a more advanced English speaker. So as I said, translating in your head is not a good or bad thing. It's just something we do. That's how we learn a language. But as you become more fluent, you'll notice it takes less and less time. And eventually you just get to a point where you can say exactly what you're thinking without having to think about it. I'm going to start with some tips on how to improve the memory process, improve how you remember certain words and certain phrases. These are not necessarily going to help you stop translating, but it will assist you when recalling information that you have learned. When thinking back and trying to remember a specific piece of vocabulary you just picked up the day before. The first one is word association. Word association. Now, you may have played this game as a child. I say a word, you say the first thing that comes to your head. I say hot, you say cold. I say dog, you say cat. So associating the phrase with an experience or image is a really good way of cementing, forcing this word into your mind, into your long-term memory. This is why you learn so much quicker when you live in a foreign country, because every time you use the language, you associate it with that shop you went to, the restaurant you went to, the hotel you went to, the person who laughed at you because you didn't pronounce something correctly, the person who corrected you when you tried to order a coffee in another language. But how can we do this in our own homes without moving to a foreign country? Well, there are a couple of ways you can do this, and you just need to try out a few and figure out which works best for you. So the first is imagining that phrase or that situation in your head. So if I say it's raining cats and dogs, a very popular English idiom, you picture in your head a blue sky, a big grey cloud comes over and a load of cats and dogs fall out of the sky. If I teach you the phrase step out, to step out of a meeting, step out of a situation. Picture yourself physically stepping out of a situation. Always try and associate it to something. If you're an artist or a creative, you can create little images and associate the words with those images. My next tip, and what a lot of teachers will tell you, is to start with perfect, simpler sentences first. Stop trying to speak like a native speaker. Stop trying to use complicated vocabulary but using it wrong. I know you want to be as intelligent and articulate as possible. You want to sound exactly like you would do in your own native language, but perfect the basic sentences first. For example, I have a student who is very good at spoken English but has never learned the grammar rules or never learned written English. so she can explain herself well, but grammatically her sentences are not correct. She will explain that her children are going to the park, and after that she will grab a coffee. The use of grab is very natural, very native, but unfortunately, I will be left trying to understand if she has already done this action or if she is about to do this action, because throughout her sentence, she flips between past, present, and future. If you perfect the basic sentences and your grammar is correct, you don't have to think about the tense. You can just say it naturally. Then you can start adding more complicated phrases, more in-depth vocabulary, more native expressions such as grab a coffee or swing by the park on the way home. So make sure you are using correct sentences. Another example and another good thing to do is to create simpler sentences, and instead of trying to link them together in a complicated way, just keep them simple. So for example, it is sunny today. I will go to the park. Two very simple sentences that are perfect grammar, and I can say them without having to think, and you can probably say them without having to think about the grammar. It is sunny today. I will go to the park. Once you know you can say that perfectly without having to translate in your head, then you can start adding conjunctions and making the sentence more complicated, like, as it is sunny today, I think I will go to the park. I will go to the park due to it being sunny today. The next method I'm going to go on to is a bit complicated, but stick with me. There will be lots of new vocabulary here, but I will explain what I mean. So this is to learn how you learn. Learn how you learn. Now, there are many ways to learn. Psychologists and behavioralists all have their different ideas of how we learn, but we can split it into four main ways of learning. So the first one is a visual learner, needing to see something either written down or on screen or on a board, or a picture linked to it, an image with words. They remember the way it looks and they can recall that image next time. So think about when you were at school and you were studying for an exam and you would highlight in different colors on a page. A visual learner, rather than remembering the words, they would remember the color of the highlighter and then be able to recall what the word was that was highlighted. Number two, auditory learners. Now, an auditory learner learns through listening, hearing something, hearing the way it sounds, hearing the way it's pronounced. A lot of musicians are auditory learners because they can listen to a song and translate that song into notes on a piano, on a guitar, and just play the song. So in a language learning sense, somebody tells you something, you repeat it, and there it is. It's learned. It's in your mind. You've taken in that information. The third way of learning is kinesthetic learners. Kinesthetic learners. It's just a fancy way of saying physical. They learned through acting, through playing, through moving things around, through role play, associating it with a situation, learning through experience. So think about very small children. They learn kinesthetically. They see an apple, they bite into it, they know the apple is hard and sweet. They see a piano, they hit the keys on the piano, they know a piano makes sound and is black and white. And our final one is reading and writing learners. Now, as the name suggests, this is related to seeing words on a page and being able to remember them. Some people call this photographic learners. I had a friend like this at school who could just look at a textbook page and remember all of that information. It's partly visual as well because you're seeing the words written out, you're seeing the pictures linked to the words, but they don't need to create an image. They can just look at a piece of writing, read it, and remember it later on. Now, personally, I need to write something down or I forget it 10 minutes later. I am currently learning a language that does not use the typical Roman alphabet. I have sung this alphabet 10 times. I listened to the song on YouTube, but I still cannot remember it at all because I know I need to write it down in order for it to stay in my long-term memory. So once you know how you learn, once you figure out what works best for you, you can focus on that tactic. Don't waste time trying to write out the same vocabulary 15 times if you know that what works better for you is listening to the vocabulary. If you are a visual learner, watch videos like this one where the words are on the screen and someone is also explaining it to you. An auditory learner can focus on podcasts, TV shows, songs. A kinesthetic learner needs more experience, practice. So try to speak English as often as possible, even if it's with yourself in the bathroom. When cooking, when driving, speak to yourself. And a reading and writing learner should be taking notes. Keep a journal close by, and when you hear a new word, write it down. Or download a flashcard app and keep track of all the new words you hear that day. So now let's move on to how we can stop translating. Now, first of all, this just takes practice. And I know that's very frustrating to hear that, but it really does. It just takes practice, repeating the same thing again and again. But how can you practice alone without a teacher? Well, here are some ideas. The first one is involving yourself as much as possible in the language. Every situation you have to speak your target language or listen to your target language or read your target language, do so. I did talk about this in my Learn English Fast video, so you can go and watch that as well if that is your goal, to learn as quickly as possible. But try to introduce English to all areas of your life. Listen to TV shows in English, have English subtitles on, talk to friends in English, write posts on social media that are in English, follow other English content creators so you're reading English on your For You page or news page. If you write emails in English, read them aloud. If you have the time, of course, and you don't work in a really busy, crowded office, have conversations with ChatGPT. Have a lesson with me. Or, of course, if you don't want to have a lesson with me or you want a different teacher, I will leave a link in the comments for 30% off your first lesson with a native English teacher. This is for a language learning platform that I really like. I think it's a fantastic one to use. It's my personal favorite one that I have worked with. But I will leave that link in the comments. This is not a sponsored video, it's just my personal opinion. Really immerse yourself in the language. Label things in your home if you need to, with the English names. Help your children with their English homework. I live in a country where the native language is not English, and I have learned so much in the past year than I ever did in my German and French classes at school, because I am surrounded by the language every single day. I hear the language. I see people speaking the language. I have to speak the language when I buy a coffee or a sandwich or I get on the train. I find basic conversation incredibly natural and I don't have to translate because I've used it so often. However, if I was put in a business setting, I would still have to translate in my mind because I am currently at an intermediate level, not an advanced level. Now, one of the questions I often get asked by students is when watching TV shows, when watching movies, is it more effective to have subtitles in your language and the people on TV speaking English, or subtitles in English and the people on TV speaking your language? Now, think back to the How We Learn section that I went through with you. So this all depends on how you learn. If you are a reader, a writer, having the subtitles in English will really help you. But if you are a visual learner, an auditory learner, having the people speaking in English will help you, and the subtitles in your native language. Another aspect, though, to consider here is if you are trying to improve your spoken English, you might want to have the audio in English so that you can also focus on pronunciation as well. Figure out how you learn, and that will help you understand if it's better to have the audio in English or the subtitles in English. Now, this one may seem strange and uncomfortable at first, but if you find yourself thinking in your native language about what you're going to buy at the supermarket, what you want for dinner, what tasks you have that day, where will you meet your friends on the weekend? Switch it up. Start that thought process again, but in English. Not only does this work as practice, but it means you won't need to translate later when somebody asks you, what are you doing today? Because you've thought about that previously in your head, about how to construct that sentence. When you first wake up and you think to yourself, today I have to go to the shops, take my dog for a walk, go to work at 8 a.m., do that in English. Okay, of course it's with yourself, so you won't have somebody correcting you, but it's still practice for using the future, the present, and the past tense, and means you will be more natural, more fluent when somebody asks you at a later point. Learn phrases and sentences rather than just vocabulary. This is more for the beginning of your language journey. Anyone at an upper intermediate to advanced level stage should have no problem just learning 10 vocabularies a day and adding them into their daily life. But when you are first starting, phrases are much better and much more effective than just vocabulary. Learning the word could and how it differs from the word should is fantastic, but it doesn't help you when you want to ask someone, could you help me? If they could pass you something. Learning that phrase and what it means in your language is much more effective because you can recall that phrase every single time. Which leads me to my next point. Learn relevant examples rather than generic ones. Now, let's say I teach you a new word, procrastinate. I always seem to choose this as my example, but I like this word a lot. Procrastinate. And I ask you to make an example sentence, and you create a perfectly correct sentence. The queen procrastinated cleaning the crown. Wow, that's a really difficult sentence to say. I hadn't realized when I'd written that as my example. That's very difficult. The queen procrastinated cleaning the crown jewels. Fantastic use of the word, perfect grammar. But will you remember that in 5 days' time? 5 hours' time? 5 minutes' time? Probably not, because it has absolutely no relevance to your life. However, if you were to create the sentence with an example relevant to you, so I will give you an example that I would use. I procrastinated replying to my tutor's email, and now I have 5 pages worth of homework to do before tomorrow. This is an actual situation, a real example for me. So I'm much more likely to remember procrastinate in the future because I understand the context, I understand the situation, and I can use it in exactly the same way, just swap out the example. This also means that when I'm speaking with other native English speakers, or even just anyone in English, I won't need to translate the word procrastinate because I've already learnt how to use it, its meaning, and where it goes in a sentence. The best thing to do when learning any new skill is practice and is repetition. I wanted to learn how to do a Rubik's Cube, and I spent an entire weekend watching the same YouTube video again and again and again until I figured out how to do it. I then put the Rubik's Cube down and never touched it again. So now, 4 months on, I don't remember how to do a Rubik's Cube. I would have to go back and watch that YouTube video. But if I had watched that video maybe 2 or 3 times a week, every week since I started, I would still know how to solve a Rubik's Cube. And it's exactly the same with learning a language. You need to get the practice in. And if you cannot do that with a teacher because it's expensive, or you don't have the time, or you don't have access to a native English speaker, that's absolutely fine. Just find ways that work for you. Figure out how you learn, figure out what works for you, and keep doing those things. Singing to yourself in the shower, watching the same episode of Friends again and again and again until you get the pronunciation perfect. Whatever works for you. Learning a language should be a fun experience. It shouldn't be something that you're forcing yourself to do. But Also recognize if you force yourself to do 10 minutes of something a day, even if it's 10 minutes thinking about your shopping in your head, that doesn't take much physical energy. Yes, we get tired and it takes a lot of mental energy. But physically, I can lie in my bed and think about my shopping in English. That's no problem. And the more you do these things, the more you will recognize you're not translating anymore. You're just saying the sentence, you're just saying the phrase. A fantastic example I had was this week. A student of mine made the same mistake she always makes, but immediately noticed it and said, that doesn't feel right. Before, I was having to tell her, no, that's incorrect, say it again, try again. But this time she noticed straight away that what she was saying didn't sound right. And that's because she had stopped translating it and was just listening to what she was saying. And the minute you realize you stop translating is the minute that you can add more vocabulary, create more complicated sentences, and go into more detail when discussing things with your colleagues, your friends, your family. So thank you for watching today. I hope there was some helpful information there. Definitely check out my How to Learn English Quickly video because there are some fantastic tips in there as well. I hope you have a fantastic week and I will see you next time. Goodbye.